Good morning, good morning.
You are listening to the MixTape, your essential addition to the never-ending road trip that is parenthood.
Presented by The Parent Trip, produced and created by us, your hosts. I'm Sarah Fuller, your mermaid-haired lactation friend.
And I'm Olivia Spitzer, the loudest labor doula you've ever met.
And together we're here to talk all things growing and maintaining small humans.
Because parenting is a trip.
So buckle up, and here we go.
Hi everybody, Sarah here for the MixTape. You may notice that Olivia is missing today, and that's just that on-call life. But I am not alone today. I am here with some guests, and I'm really excited to introduce a new series to you. We really, at the Parent Trip, want to explore what growing your family looks like, no matter what it looks like. So we have a new series that we're starting. Before we get into it, just a little bit about the Parent Trip and inclusiveness. Like, this is something that we care a lot about, which is why we didn't call it the Mommy Trip. That's really important to us, that we include all parents in all walks of life and however they got there. So this is why we're starting this series, because we want to be able to share all these different ways that families grow with you. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring in my guests and let them introduce themselves to you. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being with me today.
I'm Kate.
I'm Joel. My pronouns are he and him.
Oh, my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being with me today. I'm really excited to talk to you and hear your story. I've heard some of it before. These two are old friends of mine, and they just are wonderful people, and I can't wait to share their story with you. Them share their story with you. It's not me. So I'll let you tell it.
Well, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7. We're going to go way back for a second. And from the day I saw steel magnolias when I was, 10 or 11, I knew that probably I was not going to get pregnant and build my family through biological childbirth. And just kind of planned in my head that I was going to adopt my family, my children. And that was pretty set for me. And then we met when we were 16. And when we got to the point where that became part of the conversation, I think it was pretty just like matter of fact, like that's how we're going to have kids if that happens.
Yeah.
And you were down with it. So it was there was no like conversation. There was no questions. And I think that we are really lucky as adoptive parents in that we did not have to go through a lot of the grief that a lot of parents who eventually choose to adopt go through, because we never tried to get pregnant before we went for adoption.
That makes sense. Would you talk a little bit about like kind of why, as a type 1 diabetic, you felt like it was the right decision for you?
Yeah. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder, and it affects not just your pancreas and your ability to process sugar, but it actually affects every part of your body. Every organ in your body is affected by the illness. And being pregnant while diabetic can be very, very dangerous for both the mother and the child. You have to keep your blood sugars at a very, very, very steady rate all the time. But because your hormones are going all over the place, that's extremely difficult to do. So I would have had to be very closely monitored for the entire time. It would have been pretty miserable pregnancy for me, but it also, there's a huge percentage of danger for the child. And for the mother, and just becoming sick, causing kidney disease. It could affect my heart. And it just wasn't worth the risk because adoption was an option. And I have a lot of people in my life who adopted their families, who are some of the most wonderful people, and their families are so beautiful. And it just never occurred to me that I needed to try to do that, because I believe very strongly from a very early on that families were not about biology. They were about love and people coming together.
I love that.
What next?
What next? Well, so that, adoption was always the direction.
Yeah.
It was, the conversation was so short. It was, it's like, you want to do this? Yeah. Okay, sure. That's fine. It's funny because since we are now officially in the adoptive community, we are exposed to a lot of folks who have adopted, a lot of families that have built their family that way, and we see a wide range of opinions and how people arrived there. So, like what Kate was saying before, where we found that a lot of folks that were in that were using the adoptive agency that we used, we'll talk about that a little later, had tons of miscarriages, tons of complications, real, true, honest to God grief of trying and just having it not work. And we were in a pretty unique situation where that just wasn't it at all. Which was awkward for us because we're kind of just tra la la la, let's get a baby, so it was interesting to see that. We've also heard stories as we talked to couples about a lot of folks who struggled with adoption, and they viewed certain aspects of adoptions as negatives. Will this child be really mine? A lot of emphasis is placed on biology. The biological component is really important to a lot of folks, and I completely understand that. I understand that. It just wasn't to us at all. I mean, I don't mean to simplify, but it just wasn't. I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm intrigued, Joel, to hear. So you guys were really young when you got together, and Kate had years of kind of already having this in mind. So then you get kind of hit with this late teens. I mean, I don't know when you first talked about it.
17 or 18.
Probably, yeah.
We liked each other a lot pretty early on.
Yeah.
So.
Just what did that mean to me? It was no big deal.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was no big deal. I think probably a large portion why was, I know I do, and I'm pretty sure Kate does as well. We place a lot of importance on the nurture aspect. Obviously, nature is very important, but to me, the things that excite me about the human race are not in the cell at the cellular level. It's what the mind has to offer. It's what personality brings. It's the interesting ways that people look at things. Those are the things that excite me about people and the connections I want to make, and that just carried over into how I would look at anyone who would be my child. Is I wonder what this person's going to be like. I wonder how we can model for them, how we can impart our values, but still have them take their own unique stance on things. We don't want to make a little clone. And so I'm getting into the weeds here, but the point is that the nurture aspect was, I was very open to that. And I was not tied directly to the biological component. So it was completely no big deal for me. But like I said before, there was a lot of folks that we spoke to that was not the issue. Just anecdotally, it was often the men. If it was a hetero couple, it was the dad that was the one that was like, I'm really struggling with this, which was even more unique for me because like I'm not struggling at all. So we definitely had. I felt very unique as we went through the adoption process.
We were coming at it from a pretty different angle. There was one other family that we knew where the mother is bipolar, and she didn't want to pass that on genetically to her kids, and so they were in a similar situation to us. And I think that the father was in a similar position to Joel, where it was just like, yeah, this is just how we need to grow our family. But yeah, we felt fairly unique, and I think we did a lot of listening to other families and really felt fortunate in our position for sure. But definitely I learned so much through the process from these other families about what adoption looks like for so many others. And it's really a unique story for every single family. You can't ever make any assumptions about an adoptive family and the way that they're made and how they're put together. It's every single family is an extremely unique experience. For sure. So we'll get to the actual story of how we attained our child, got our baby girl. When we really had a nice time in our 20s and did the Gen X thing where we decided not to have kids in our 20s. And but when we hit 30, all of our friends got pregnant, and we were like, oh, I guess maybe it's time. And so we started doing research on adoption, and we'd always kind of in that time in our generation, what you did was if you didn't adopt domestically, like within your own country, you adopted a little girl from China. And that was just, I mean, that was what you did. That was where we went. It was the easiest. It was, and a lot of people in the Portland area had done that. There was a lot of good community built around it, and a lot of agencies that were working with China. And so that's where we started. But it turned out that at the point that we started trying to adopt, and we had decided to go with international. We didn't want to, at the time, working with a birth family didn't appeal to us for a variety of reasons. So we chose to go international. And we started looking at agencies that worked with China, discovered that China was actually kind of overloaded. They had more parents, the adoptive families, than they did babies and children. And so we discovered that Vietnam had opened up, and we shifted to Vietnam and signed up with an agency that worked with Vietnam and adoptions, and were told that basically we'd have a baby in 6 months, and that the child would be around 1 year old when we got them, a little bit younger, a little bit older. And that sounded great. And so we started working with this agency, and we met a bunch of people through the agency, and feel free to take up the thread whenever you want to. And then 6 months came, and then it was, well, it's going to be 9 months. And then our friends had their babies, and then it was 12. And then it was
18.
18.
And then all this, I mean, you're seeing the pattern. So the short version of it is that bureaucracy and red tape had entered, and it just wasn't going to happen on the timeline that it was supposed to happen. So we were bummed out about it. Obviously, one thing to consider is that while we're waiting and while we're hearing this timeline, we have a lot of work that we have to do that's required for adoptive families. We have to create an enormous packet, truly mind-bogglingly large packet of paper that is basically vets us. We are fit to be parents. Yeah. And I'm here to tell you, it's everything under the sun.
Psychological evaluation.
We had to
medical examination.
We were fingerprinted by the Department of Homeland Security. I wrote a check to the Department of Homeland Security. No joke. That was an interesting day. And as I was writing it, I can't believe I'm writing a check to the Department of Homeland Security.
And this is all for international adoption, because there's also immigration that has to happen when you do international adoption. And so we had to be prepared for travel to Vietnam. So we had to do all of the basic things you have to do to travel,
passports
to Vietnam. And then you have to do all the things you have to do for immigration of the child when you bring them back. And then you have to do all of the making sure that we are not crazy, terrible people. And it costs a lot of money. And it takes a lot of time.
So we're creating this large packet, and we're hearing this timeline extend. And this is no joke. we were right there. We had finished it's called a dossier is the proper term for the large packet that we're making. We've completed our dossier. We're getting ready to hand it into the adoption agency. And at that point in time is when you have to write a very large check, a 5-digit check. And we pumped the brakes, and we were right there. I mean, it was, gosh, like a few days or a week or something. And we thought, I don't know. Once we hand them this check, we're locked in. We will not have freedom to move elsewhere because we're not money bags. How many times can you write a 5-digit check, you know?
Yeah.
Right. I assume there's like no refunds. There's no,
Right.
and there's probably no promise on timing at this point either.
Exactly.
And just to, I don't want to pound on the money thing, but I think that people don't realize, if you are a lucky enough person to have insurance and you get pregnant and have a baby, it is relatively inexpensive to give birth to a baby. There is nothing like that for adoptive families. So we literally had a garage sale. My work community came together and we had a giant garage sale at one of my friends' houses to help fund this. A lot of our family gifted us money. We saved a lot. A lot of it came on credit cards. So that's a piece that is not important. We would have paid whatever we had to, we would have done whatever we had to do because we wanted our child. But it is something that I think people don't realize is the expense that comes from it.
And to clarify, you're not paying for a human life,
right?
Because that would be trafficking. What you're paying for is all the associated services that surround the person that you're adopting. Just a point of clarification.
Yeah, all of that dossier building.
Yeah,
and then the agency that you work with and that kind of thing. Anyway,
so we're right there, and it just wasn't feeling right. We're like, if this, we're swinging for the moon here. If we miss, we are screwed because we're out 5 digits, and what are we going to do? And so we made the difficult decision to stop. And let me tell you, in hindsight,
that's a good decision.
That was probably the single most important decision we made in the entire adoption process. Shortly after we made that decision, Vietnam began to close their adoptions. And I mean,
to the U.S.
To the United States.
Wow.
I mean, close the program completely. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of the people who were in the agency with us go down that road, and they were in a hard place. It was rough. They had to work with the agency to redirect. Well, maybe we can go over to this country. Maybe we can go over to that country. And
a lot of people also had already been matched with children. They had pictures. And again, these are families who've suffered a lot of pregnancy loss. And then they have this image of this child, and then they lost that child as well. It was a really rough time for the community that we'd become a part of. And that was really hard.
Yeah.
So then we had to like reset completely after all of that happened.
So maybe we should talk about why we wanted to do international.
Yeah. So we had decided to do international, like I had mentioned earlier, because we didn't want to be involved with a birth family. And I think for me, I'm not going to speak for Joel, but for me, there was a lot of fear involved in that decision. I just didn't, I think as the mother of the child, there is a lot of stigma on women who can't give birth or who don't give birth. And having the mother who did give birth involved in my child's life was scary for me and intimidating for me. And that was a huge reason for that. And then we also just, I didn't at the time feel comfortable like inviting this whole new group of people that I didn't know just into our very personal, intimate parts of our life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, absolutely fear. For me, what I liked about it was with international, it is very clear. There's a lot of clarity. I'm the birth mother, and at this point, I am the guardian of this child, and now you take over, and now you are the guardian of this child. It's very cut and dry. It's very black and white. It's very clear.
It seems that way. It appears that way.
Yes. Yes, our limited understanding. And for example, in China, a lot of the children, almost all of the children, were from an orphanage. So there's no birth family whatsoever in the mix. So for me, the clarity and the black and white factor was attractive to me because there's no muddy water of we're clearly the parents. That's something that was attractive, and that was a fear-based reaction.
Yeah,
absolutely. We'll get to the part later where we completely 180 that decision.
Yeah.
Quite literally. So now here we are, no Vietnam. And what do we do?
Well, and then at the time, and I don't have any expertise on this, so I'm just going to say this language, and then I'm not going to be able to explain it. So please just know that at the time, the federal government was introducing something called the Hague, and it had to do with international adoption was affected by this Hague. I can't remember if it was a law or a bill or it's an agreement.
It's a global human rights agreement.
Global human rights agreement. And as a result of that becoming something that was being put in place at the time, and this was in between 2007 and 2010, a lot of countries were slowing down with adoptions to the United States or closing completely. And we couldn't find international adoption that felt safer than the Vietnam adoption.
Safer, or in our price range, or in our desired timeline, or age of child, because we did want an infant.
And when I say safe, I don't mean like physically safe. I mean like emotionally heart safe.
Right.
For sure.
And of course, and I mean, it sucks when we're in it, but of course it was a good thing that these things were refactoring and shutting down, because it was in an attempt to, battle corruption and all the nefarious things that can happen in international adoption world.
Yeah.
I mean, that sucked because we were in the middle of it. Like, well, we just want a kid. We want to. So, but in hindsight, obviously, not in hindsight, but even then we knew it was fine. So it was a good thing, but it sucked to be a part of it. So, well, what did we think? Well, let's go domestic, and so let's get one of them American babies.
So we did a lot of research and started to learn about what it meant for a child to have a connection to their birth family, and because that was the piece that needed to be adjusted and kind of researched and looked at more deeply for us. And what we learned was that it's really important for children to have a connection to their biological background. And that was just a huge learning experience for us to understand that just because you love this child like they are your own, there is a piece of them that is missing, and that they will want to know what's going on with their biology and their biological family, and the whys of everything, and who they look like, and that kind of stuff. And so we learned a lot, and it was very eye-opening, and I'm really grateful that we did open ourselves to that. And we ended up going with an agency in Oregon that's been around. They used to run the orphanages in Oregon before we didn't have orphanages anymore. And they really helped us kind of come to some clarity on what it means to have open or semi-open adoptions with a birth family. And we grew comfortable with that idea. But it took 6 months for us to come to that point after we left Vietnam. So we'd been in the Vietnam adoption situation for about 1.5 years, and then it took about another 6 months. So we were 2 years into the process by the time we settled and realized we needed to move into something to domestic adoption. And then we started the process kind of all over again. They gracefully let us, they didn't make us do another background check.
I was gonna ask. I was like, how much of that dossier could be?
Yeah, it was kind of like transferring. Yeah, it was kind of like transferring college credits. You know, we'll take most of them, but not all of them.
Yeah.
But a good chunk, and we did a lot more for the international than we needed to do for domestic. Domestic
Way
is
more.
simpler.
Yeah.
On a lot of levels, because you don't have all the, you know, you're not traveling internationally. There's no immigration, all of that stuff. So it's a lot. You're not dealing with two governments. You're only dealing with one. And so it definitely was simpler. So we had to take classes. The process just looked like we had to take a weekend class where we went every day for the weekends, 2 8-hour days.
Yeah.
Saturday and Sunday. And we learned as much as they could cram into our brains about like what it means to be an adoptive family, how it's the same and how it's different. They taught a lot about like attachment parenting, because you don't have that biological connection. There's a lot of, they really highly encourage attachment parenting when you adopt, because that way you create that bond outside of biology, which was really great. They have a panel of adoptive families that we've since gone back to be on a few times. So you could talk to different families about their experiences. We met a lot more families, which was great. And
they had brought a couple birth mothers in too.
They brought birth mothers in
to talk, which was
their experiences.
enlightening.
And it was really so good. I'm glad you mentioned that, because going into adoption, when your goal, all I want is my baby, is how most people start. And I can't speak for everybody. And it's so important to think about all of the people involved in this situation. And birth mothers are incredible human beings, people that choose to make an adoption plan for their child because they feel that their situation is not what they want for their child. That's the, I don't know, bravest, most selfless,
amazing selfless
thing that you could do. And so it was so important for me to learn about this and to meet these women and kind of set my head in a different space with them. And I really appreciated that. It was very powerful and really important for sure. So we did all of our things. We had our home studies where a social worker comes to your house and makes sure that your house is fit for a child to live in. And then we made it into what they call a parent pool, which means you are a waiting family. And
family book.
Yeah. And you're waiting to get matched with a birth family. And that process involves the family book.
Yeah, it's this funny little Kate and Joel, this is your life in scrapbook form.
Basically a scrapbook about us and why you should pick us to raise your baby. It's an interesting little like catalog situation. It's very strange.
I mean, you kind of have to, you're marketing yourself a little bit, which is kind of fun.
Still have yours?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
You do show people? Can I see it someday when I come over?
Yeah, sure. It's we'd show you right now, but it's in storage.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. It's like your entire life boiled down to this little, Mylar folder thing. Kind of funny.
It's really an interesting process. And our social worker was like, maybe you should change the photo on the front. Because it's very formal, and maybe you want something a little more fun and candid. And it was a really interesting process to create that book.
Yeah, it was. So then we are in the waiting pool, and we wait.
And we wait.
And we wait.
And
wait and wait.
The process looks like this. So it's so different from international. and the reason that we appreciated our agency so much was because of this. And I don't know what it looks like at other agencies, but what they do is they work with the birth mothers and they work with the adoptive families. And the birth mothers come in and they say, you know, we're looking for a family to adopt our child. And then they have, it's not the same as a family book, but it's kind of a dossier on the birth family. And so we'll get an email from our social worker and it will say, here's a birth mother who's looking for a family. And we would read up on this person, and it has, you know, like a little bit of a medical background, a little bit about the person, the mother, and if the father is involved, that too, and maybe a little family history. And then we look at that and we decide if that's somebody that we want to show our family book to. So there's a lot of choice in this open domestic adoption situation.
It's reminding me a little bit of the online dating, the OkCupid, like you both have to say you're interested before they show you to each other.
Yeah.
And then
except we're reading about possible pregnancy teratogens.
Yeah.
And, yeah, seriously.
Oh, it gives a list of teratogens and, you know, that kind of stuff. And we had to like decide which teratogens were acceptable and which weren't, which was like, it was a strange thing.
Which I can't say enough positive stuff about the agency we used in Oregon. They are.
If you want to name drop, I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
Boys and Girls Aid Society.
Okay.
Yeah, they are the oldest agency in Oregon. We did a lot of research. That's a whole other tangent. But we did a lot of research on which agency we wanted to use, and they were head and shoulders the winner. They were not faith-based, which was important to us. No knock against any agency that is faith-based, but sometimes those agencies can be restrictive in their clientele. And I'll contrast this and it will become clear to you. Boys and Girls Aid were the first agency to adopt a child to a gay couple in the state of Oregon. They were the first to do a single parent woman, first single parent man.
Very inclusive.
Very, very inclusive.
And in the early 2000s, that wasn't as common.
No, it was not.
Yeah.
And coming out of the 90s, there was, should gay people be able to adopt at all? I mean, we were coming out of that. So that was really important to us. And then the other aspect that we liked about them is that they are a social service organization. They are not their children are not a product. It's not a retail transaction. They support the birth mothers and they counsel them
past after the birth and after the adoption.
Well, yeah, and they even talk to them like, is this the path you want to take? Do you want to adopt? Do you not want to adopt? Let's talk about the pros and cons of each. And they're trained to counsel them, which was that was very important to us. It was fantastic. So it was definitely not we are the adoptive parents. Here's our big check we're waving around. Now fetch us a child. That's not what it was. It was this social service organization taking care of everyone's head and heart throughout the entire process, which was super important to us.
Yeah. And they proved to be completely honest in all of that. Like we really appreciated how they served everyone involved in the adoption process.
So much.
Yeah, it was really good. So we really appreciate them, and they're still going, and they do foster to adopt as well as infant adoption. They do a lot of work with foster kids, which is also really excellent.
Yeah, and they have tons of other services. They help.
Yeah, they do a lot.
Homeless youth. There's a place for. I think didn't they have a school that they were running
at that time. I don't know if they still do.
Yeah, at that time they had a regular high school where homeless teens could go to school there. It was great. They're a great organization. I really can't say enough good stuff about them. Well, we'll speed it up here. I feel like we're kind of dragging a little.
There's a lot. Adoption's complicated, and so there's a lot to talk about.
Well, I love it, and I think it's something that, like, I have very limited adoption experience. Like, I know some people who adopted, but I haven't really done the deep dive. I mean, this is the deepest I've gone in it with you guys. Okay. We've been friends for
many years.
And I think it's really important that we have all the information, because how else are you supposed to make really good decisions about something that's so life-changing, for you and for this birth family, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, so we did wait, and we waited and waited a very long time. So we got some, we would get some birth mother dossiers, and there was a few times when we would send our family book. We would not get chosen. There were birth mothers that we chose not to show our family book to, and at one point, we learned that our documents had expired.
Yes.
And then we had to do
Forgot about that
all over again.
Oh no.
It was rough. And then so we had to do that all over again, and our social worker had forgotten to tell us, and it was just kind of messy. And we were a year in. So at this point, we were 3.5 years into the process. And about a year of being in the family pool, we still hadn't been matched with a family. And we had been planning our life around this potential of a baby, right? When you get pregnant, you know that within 40 weeks, there will be this new human in your life, and you have to plan. Well, you can't do that when you're adopting. You can't, you don't have an end point. And so you go about life assuming there will be a baby at some point. And then it just didn't happen, and it just didn't happen. And so we actually got to a point where we were like, okay, we need to just stop planning for the baby. I applied to grad school. We just kind of stopped planning. And I even told my family, like I was at a family gathering, and I was like, yeah, if a baby comes, great. And if not, we're fine. We're just gonna stop planning. It's just, and whatever happens, happens. And our social workers talked a lot about the universe and about the process. And the process, what did
Trust the process.
Trust the process. Trust the process. And we were always like, yeah, process. We've been through a lot of processes. And so we kind of just got to that point. And then a week or two after that decision, I was in an interview with my advisor for grad school. I got into grad school, and was in a meeting with my advisor, taking the Max home from Portland State, and I get a phone call from Joel on the Max. And hey, there's a birth mom. Let me read you her dossier. It sounds really good. And he reads me about this person. I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's send her our family book. Not excited, not anticipated, whatever. Because it had not worked so many times. And he's like, okay, great. And then I went home and hung out for a little while. And then I went to my friend's birthday party, and Joel stayed home, and I went to a birthday dinner for a friend of mine. And then you want to talk about the phone? Okay.
No,
I had my phone out just in case we got the phone call, right? You have to be prepared. And I was having a great time eating delicious food at this restaurant. And then the maitre d' comes to our table and says, I'm looking for Kate. And I was like, that's me. And he said, you have a phone call. And then, of course, heart in throat, heart pounding. It's been 3.5 years. And now I'm having a delightful dinner with friends, and I get a phone call at a restaurant. So I go answer the phone, and what did you say? Are you ready to go meet our daughter?
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to go meet our daughter? Was what Joel said on the phone when I picked it up. And I was trying not to cause a scene in the restaurant, but we ended up kind of causing a scene anyway. And he's like, she wants to meet us. The birth mother wants to meet us. The baby,
like right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna come pick you up from dinner. So I went over, and I was actually at dinner also with my boss. So I'm a teacher, and I was there with all my staff, was all at this dinner, in this big, long, loud, noisy teacher table, because teachers like to talk. And I walk over to my boss and I whisper, you're gonna need to get me a sub. I'm going on maternity leave. And my staff has been through all of this with me. And so she freaked out, and then she did cause a scene, and then she told everyone else at the table, and they caused a scene. And then the waitress got called over and they boxed up my dinner, and everybody gave me a hug, and everybody was screaming and disrupting everyone else's nice meal. And Joel picked me up and we drove to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And what this was, so there's two ways. They have kind of two things. You can meet a birth family before the baby's born and get to know the birth family. And then when the baby's born, then you, if the birth family still chooses to adopt the child, do the adoption plan with the child, then you pick up the baby from the hospital and you get to be with the family and say goodbye and all of that stuff. And then they have what the agency called an instant baby, which is the birth mother chooses adoption after the child is born.
So they did not come to the agency.
Right. And so that what happens is the baby is born, the birth mother talks to a social worker at the hospital, then the social worker at the hospital talks to Boys and Girls Aid Society, and then they arrange everything. And so this was an instant baby. So the baby was already born. And so we drove to the hospital where she was born to meet our social worker and to meet the birth mother.
So I have a quick question before we get too much farther into this. So when you're reading these books, I assume they say like this is their due date, right? So every time you would read a book, you kind of had an idea on a window. So when you got this particular book or you heard about this particular mom, you knew it was
already born, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Yes. So
Yeah.
we already knew she'd been born. I skipped that.
Okay.
So we knew that there was a baby that
Gotcha.
existed. We knew it was a little girl and that she was healthy. Like we knew all of that, which made it, very appealing,
Right.
but like kind of wild.
Yeah.
And so we went to the hospital. We met with our social worker first before we went in to the hospital room. And then
And the birth mother's social worker was there as well. They each have their own separate social worker to avoid
conflict of interest.
Yeah, conflict of interest,
Yeah.
which is another reason why we liked.
Yeah. And then we walked into this hospital room, and there was a baby in the bassinet, and I personally could not look at her because no papers had been signed yet, and I was just really freaked. And I kind of side-eyed, and then I just like went straight for the bed to meet the birth mom.
And some of her family was in there.
Her mom and her two aunts.
Mm-hmm. And her dad was there. He had just stepped out.
Uh-huh. And we met, we were introduced, and then we just sat and talked. They let us.
She asked do you want to hold her?
Did she ask right away?
But almost right away,
Okay.
yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. And so there was this baby, and it was kind of surreal. And we talked for about 3 hours.
Was it that long?
Maybe less.
It was a little less than that, I think.
And
Because we got there at 7.
yeah, but we left at 10.
Yeah, we left at 10.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird the details you remember and the details you don't.
Right.
And we talked, and it was so wonderful to meet this young woman. And we had so much in common. And she looked a little bit like my side of the family, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we just learned all these things about her, and she learned about us. And it was just this really nice conversation. And then we also got to talk to, like I said, her mom and her two aunts, and they told us all this information about like
Mm-hmm.
what the babies are like in their family, and what they're like is to like all of that biological information that you don't get to have when you adopt a child. We got to learn about or when you aren't involved with the birth family. Right. And, we learned about like when the kids get acne, and all the girls have hazel eyes and all the boys have brown eye, and all of those things that we know about our biological families. And it was so nice to do that. And then the papers were signed, and in Oregon, once the birth family signs the papers, they can't change their mind about the adoption, before the ink is dry. Oregon is very protective of adoptive families, in that way. In a lot of states, there's a 30-day waiting period.
Yeah, anywhere from 24 hours to up to a month, which I couldn't imagine. I mean, can you imagine on day 29 getting that phone call that says, "Sorry, we changed our mind"? I mean, that's the level of heartbreak I don't think I could handle.
Yeah. Well, we're very fortunate to be in Oregon for that purpose. So then the papers were signed, and we had held the baby and fed the baby, and her name is Holly now, but it wasn't then. It wasn't then yet. And gotten to know this really delightful young woman and her family, and they both, Holly and her birth mom had to stay at the hospital overnight for obstetrics. She had to stay in the hospital for 48 hours.
It's policy.
And so we went home after that.
Would have been weird.
It was weird knowing that we're going to bring this baby home the next day, but we didn't have her yet. It was 10 o'clock.
We called all of our parents.
We called everybody.
Everyone freaked out.
In the middle of the night. Yep. And then the next day we went back to the hospital in the morning, had a little more time to talk. I hadn't slept the entire night before. I was just, what?
I feel like I wouldn't be able to leave the hospital.
Yeah. It was rough. Yeah.
It was weird. It was all weird. And we
had our go bag.
So it had been suggested that if there is an instant baby that you have like a bag. So we had like gender neutral clothing,
some diapers,
some bottles,
baby wipes,
some wipes, like the basic things you need for infant survival, and a car seat. And so we brought that back with us, and after a little bit, we said goodbye. The birth mother was checking out of the hospital, and that was really emotional for everybody.
We gave her big hugs.
Gave her hugs, and
I remember how she smells. I can smell her hair still.
Yeah, it's very visceral experience, and then she left, and we were parents.
And that's the short version.
Yeah. We stayed in the hospital for the rest of that day because Holly's 48 hours hadn't finished yet at the hospital, so she had to stay under observation. So we were given a room, a recovery room, and family could come visit. And so all the grandparents and aunties and uncles and cousins got to meet Holly, and we laid there, and I continued to not sleep, and then we brought our baby home.
There you go.
And that was it. And then we were parents. We had nothing because we never knew. We'd never had a baby shower, or anything like that in preparation, and we didn't have a baby's room set up.
Didn't have a crib.
We didn't have a crib because we just didn't know. And we figured if we met a birth mother who was pregnant, we would just a month or two.
The agency said the ideal point in the process is if they could match you 5 to 7 months before birth, that's their preference.
Yeah.
So we figured, we'd have 5 to 7 months to make something.
We had no time at all.
Yeah.
So, and we had asked our family not to come visit for the first few days because we needed to do some of that bonding stuff. So she slept in our bed. We co-slept for a while, and the grandmas would like go to the store and buy things and drop them off on our porch, and then call. And that was, that's how we became parents. It's a long story, but it's a good one.
I love it.
All right, let's kick it over to you. Please give some structure to this thing, huh?
Well, it's so great. One question I had kind of along the way that I forgot to ask, because you were talking about the money piece with the international. So when it comes domestic, I wonder if you would mind kind of comparing the cost, but then also there was like a deadline, right? You said before it was locked in. And is that similar with a domestic as well?
So the thing with international adoption is the cost varies wildly based on the country.
Okay.
I mean, like by a factor of 100%. I mean, a huge difference
Okay.
depending on where you go. When we were adopting, the most common places were China,
Guatemala.
yeah, Russia, and
And like Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan.
yeah, a lot of Eastern Bloc places, and then a few places in Africa, Ethiopia.
Oh yeah, Ethiopia.
And depending, the cost was completely different.
And it's all based on the government decisions, because adoption is run by, it's a legal process, adoption. And so all the fees and everything are determined by the government. And so when you're working with two governments, you're paying fees to both governments.
Sure.
And then, you know, traveling to Kazakhstan is far different cost-wise than traveling to Vietnam or Guatemala, depending on where you are. But I think we would have ended up spending $35,000 to $40,000, including the travel for the international. And our domestic experience, which again is vastly depending on how you choose to do it, ended up being like half of that.
It was like 25 to 30.
Yeah. So we ended up
25 to 30 roughly.
Yeah. So we ended up spending more than we would have on domestic because we'd already spent some money on the international. The thing with domestic is there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can be connected with a person who is pregnant, who wants to make an adoption plan privately, and you can hire a lawyer, and there can be no social workers involved at all and no agency involved at all, and do a private adoption. And sometimes that includes paying for the birth mother's medical fees, and sometimes it doesn't if they have
or
insurance,
other things like
or housing,
food
or
housing.
I mean, it really and one of the reasons that we chose not to go with a private adoption, because there are people like, you can put ads in the paper, and those were all things that we looked into and thought about. And there are people who put ads in the paper who are looking to make an adoption plan for their child and want to do it privately that way. It's very strange and transactional. And then there's agency adoption, and depending on how that agency is funded, that changes. I don't think there are. We didn't look at any for-profit, and I don't believe there are for-profit adoption agencies. But I have no idea. We didn't run across any.
The agency was so clearly the route for us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is for multiple reasons. The support network for everyone, not just for the adoptive parents,
huge.
but for the birth. And 99 times out of 100, it's a birth mother. It's one female. The support network is very important.
Yeah.
They have all the processes in place. They've done it a million times. The whole lawyer route was absolutely not attractive to us.
No.
So
but
a lot of people
really
like
is,
it.
Yeah.
Another big thing is that if a birth mother should change her mind,
you don't lose any money.
You don't lose any money, which was a big one. Because again, it's frustrating because you're talking about building your family, and it's weird to have this money constantly come up. But
yeah,
I mean, we're talking, it's big money.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
Yeah. So if it doesn't work out, you could maybe say, well, I guess we're not going to have a child for 5 to 6 more years until we can save up. It's a big deal. So the agency provides that level of protection, which was very important to us as well.
Yeah. But it really does vary wildly, but it will be tens of thousands of dollars. And I assume it's more expensive now, 10 years later.
Yeah. Well,
than it was, but I don't know.
One important thing to note is that at that time, the federal government, I do not know if they still do this. I haven't checked into it. I would hope they do. They provided an adoption tax credit.
Yeah.
Which, to be clear, is not a deduction. It is a credit. So whatever your tax bill is, they will pay that for you. They will pay the amount. When we were doing it, it was $11,400. Not, I don't know why I remember that, but that's how much it was when we were doing it. Congress has voted at that time. Congress had voted to renew it whenever it comes up for renewal. So that's a very helpful, enormously helpful.
Yeah.
Because
But you
helps.
still have to have that money up front to start.
Right.
You do.
Yes.
Yeah. So we borrowed a lot. We took out a second mortgage on our house.
Yeah, we did. And to be clear, so, if your tax liability is not the full amount, they'll just apply it each year until you've used up the credit. So it's not like, well, if we can just come up with the money for right now, we'll get it back immediately.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way. If your tax bill is only, $5,000 or whatever, well, then they'll pay it that year, and then you have to wait until next year and they'll pay it that year. So you could potentially be 2 to 3 to 4 years, depending on how much what your tax bill is.
It's not like the refundable child tax credit stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
Yeah.
One other big thing that I think about and I wonder about when thinking about adopting a baby specifically, but this probably really applies to any age, is I think we rely a lot on, and this is actually a common problem with breastfeeding parents, is it's natural and my body was meant to do this, and there's a natural shift that happens and everything, which it's not. It's it doesn't really work that way, but that's what we think.
right.
And so then to not have that hormonal and time process of a pregnancy, I guess my first question is how did you worry about that? And then how did it actually turn out?
I did. And I think, I'm more of a spinner than Joel is, I think. Or maybe I just spin externally more than he does. I don't know. But I did for sure. Again, I mentioned there's that stigma. There's a lot of stigma on the female parent of an adopted child. And that was a piece of it that I was concerned about. I did the whole, what if I don't immediately bond with the baby? What if she doesn't bond with me? What if she needs her birth mom's smell? All that stuff. And thankfully, again, our agency did a lot of work with us on that and how to bond. And we brought her blanket home from the hospital that her birth mom had held. And so we had that as a transition piece. I don't know. What about you?
I had no such concerns. No.
Yeah.
No, I remember those. I remember.
Yeah.
For you, absolutely.
It was, pretty intimidating, but it was weird. It's one, I think that there are some hormone changes that happened in me. It was, I felt physically different, and there's no science behind this theory at all. But I felt,
I don't know. I bet there's just no research behind it. I bet there's science behind it.
Yeah, there's no research behind it. I felt definitely had physical change feelings. And the instant that I held her the very first time, it's your baby. You just share that responsibility with another family, and it was instantaneous. I think for both of us. And you experience all of the post-birth activities. You got to wake up in the middle of the night, you got to feed the baby, you got to hold the baby. Your whole life becomes this baby, right? When they're infants and you have that time. And we did a lot of attachment parenting, and that, a lot of skin to skin, and just all those things that Dr. Spock, we read a lot of, or Dr. Sears, not Dr. Spock, Dr. Sears. Yeah. We read a lot of Dr. Sears and did all of those things, the co-sleeping and having their little breath right next to you while you're sleeping. And she was less than 48 hours old when we became her parents. And I think that was huge. Mm-hmm. So I think that there were some hormonal things that changed, and definitely your heart and mind becomes a parent really quickly. And I think she bonded with us very quickly as well. And we did, like I said, we had a blanket that her birth mom had held her in and had her scent on it. And so we used that a lot to kind of transition, which was good. Yeah, but I remember Joel's dad saying the same thing. Like, he walked in and saw the baby, and it just like didn't even occur to him that there was no blood involved. You know, you just, it's your baby. You know, so.
I love that so much. I had a question and I lost it because I got immersed in your story. What was it?
The funny thing is that what I joke. I mean, I was laughing when I said that's the short version, but it actually literally is the short version. I mean, there's tons of other stuff to touch on, but we'd be here all day.
What is something, like, if you could pick something, say a family was considering going the adoption route, would you have like a main piece of advice you would give them?
Ooh.
That's one I should have given you ahead of time.
No. I can absolutely. So if somebody said to me, like, Joel, give me your honest opinion, give it to me straight, I would absolutely recommend an agency rather than going the lawyer one-on-one route. Hands down, emphatically. They have the structure, the resources, the knowledge, the network, everything's in place. And specifically, I would hope that the agency has services for the birth mother as well. I think that's a really important component. And I know that Boys and Girls Aid has that. Doing the whole one-on-one, placing an ad, getting a lawyer, it's the complexity introduced in that is enormous. The chances that something could go wrong, in my opinion, are very large. There's just too many moving parts. And I think the agency is an enormous help, and the mental and psychic comfort that comes from knowing that you're working with professionals who have done this a million times, who have all the structure and everything in place. It just takes, I'll speak for myself, it takes an enormous weight off of my shoulders, knowing that there's that level of, it just provides a level of comfort. Now, of course, you know, as with anything involving human beings, something can go wrong or somebody can change their mind and what have you. Obviously, I mean, I don't want to mislead and say that it will be perfect. Go to the baby store and place baby in cart and then check out. It's, you know, obviously that's not what it is.
Right.
But that would be, for me personally, the number one recommendation that I would make to anybody who's thinking about it. Maybe the second thing would be prepare yourself emotionally.
Yeah, and I would jump off of that and say, when you see adoptions on TV, it's not real. Just like when you see babies being born on TV, it's not real. Just like every birth story is completely personalized and different. Just like every story that leads to adoption is very different. Every adoption is very different. We had friends who signed up, got in the parent pool, had a baby in 3 months. We had friends, then we had our story where it took 3.5 years and like multiple steps. People who foster to adopt. I have a good friend who was adopted himself, and he and his husband now have 2 kids, and they're trying to adopt their third, and her birth family is, and it's a foster situation, so there isn't as much choice on the birth family side, and so they're really struggling, and they may not get to keep her, and they've had her for 6 months. And so it varies wildly, and you can't expect it to be like on TV. Like, I can't, every time I see a TV show where a young teen has a baby in a hospital and her single female teacher comes in and says, I want to raise your baby, and then she walks out with the baby, that's not how it works. So just like know that it can be as much of a struggle as any other part of making your family. Any other way to make a family, it's the same, or it can be as easy as any other way to make a family.
Well, what's the thing that some people said to you, like, oh,
you're doing it the easy way.
You're doing it the easy way.
Yeah.
Some people said that, oh, you're not getting pregnant and you're doing it the easy way.
Yeah.
I mean, they were saying it in jest, like, you know, ha ha ha.
Right.
And of course, meanwhile, Kate and I are biting our tongue.
Yeah. And the parent who carries the child does not have the same physical stress that a parent who biologically carries a child. But emotionally, it's its own thing.
Yeah.
So.
This is super superficial, but have you ever seen a movie or show do it right? Like portray it well?
Yeah. This Is Us does a great job with it, except for the initial adoption where they adopt Randall, because they literally just like walked out of the hospital with their third child. There's a lot involved, although maybe in the early 80s it wasn't the same, but there's a lot of paperwork involved when adopting a child. They definitely have done it right, and I honestly think they might be the only show that I've ever seen that does it what I say is right. There's just no walking out of the hospital with the baby. There's no wandering in and then wandering out, and like making the decision when you're in the hospital and just leaving with a child. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we definitely could dive in on this and talk forever. I think that's a really lovely place to stop, unless you have last lingering thoughts.
No.
Well, I mean, an enormous thing that we didn't talk about is the different styles of adoptions with regard to closed adoption, open adoption, semi-open, semi-closed. That in and of itself being a whole nother conversation. The short version is that it's how much is the birth family involved with your family,
which is a kind of if you wanted to ever do another one where you're talking about building a family, there are families who have the birth family becomes part of their family for sure. And you don't just get a new child, you get a whole new branch of your family. And then there are families where that doesn't happen at all. So
I just to acknowledge that we kind of brushed over that component.
Yeah.
That is an enormously important component that
could take another hour.
Yeah.
Right. Well, who knows? Maybe we'll talk about it again sometime.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here with me and for being willing to share about how Holly joined your family. Thank you all for being here and watching and listening in. I hope that this has been really helpful. If you have questions, please leave them in comments. If I can't answer them, I will totally poke Kate and Joel for answers. And it's really important conversations to be had about how we all continue to be happy in this world and have families that include all the peoples. So I'm excited to start this dialogue and to kind of illuminate some stories that maybe you haven't heard before. All right, thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you love what we're up to,
We hope so.
and you want to hang out with us more,
We like you too.
wherever you're watching,
Or listening.
you should be sure to subscribe so you'll get notified when we post something new.
Be the person in the know.
You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Parent Trip PDF.
Virtual connection is just so in these days.
And if you really like us,
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Olivia,
Okay.
you can support us through our Patreon. We do resource fairs, informational panels, and our conversation series all for free, so anyone can access it.
That is actually super important to us.
So by joining our Patreon, you make more content possible.
And make our hearts very glad. Thanks.
Thanks!